Hey guys, so as I mentioned in the overview, I really want to start with the answer types. Now, if there's one thing that you could learn, and after this course maybe you forget everything else, but if there's just one thing you want to take away, it's how to deal with the answer types. Because really, if you have that one skill, you'll be able to at least score almost perfect, if not perfect, okay? Because it's a skill that's very different to what we do in school, in life. It's very specific to test prep, okay? So let's take a look today at the first type of answer, which are direct details. So direct details. Direct details are answers where basically you're just looking for the answer that says exactly what the passage does. It's a direct detail, okay? Super direct. So I'm just going to go right into it because this is the easiest type. Most people can get this kind of question correct, but sometimes we get confused when there are multiple options. But here's a passage from the first practice test, okay? Don't read it. Now, you could read it if you want to, but actually I'm asking you not to read it. Because for direct details, often you get more confused by reading the rest of the passage. For example, perhaps the question's asking you about this line right here, but you're remembering something from a line over here. But that's never going to be the answer. It's never going to be the answer if it told you to look over here, okay? So we're going to focus on just the lines the passage is telling us to look at. So here's the first question. In the second paragraph, lines 12 to 19, what do the authors claim to be a feature of biological interest? Well, step one, go find paragraph 2. There you go. But it was asking me, what is a feature of biological interest within this paragraph? Boom, right there, look at that, biological interest. So I know this sentence is of particular interest to me. Now that doesn't mean it's 100% in this sentence, but I'm going to start here. The first feature of our structure, which is one of biological interest, is, so here is the biological interest. The interest is that it consists not of one chain, but of two. So the answer I'm looking for first is going to be that there's not one chain, but two. That is what is of interest to me. So let's take a look. Which of these says that? A, the chemical formula of DNA. Nope, it doesn't talk about anything about a formula, does it? B, the common fiber axis. Now, I don't even know what that is. It's probably in the passage somewhere, so I'm going to leave that as a probably not. I'll come back to it if I can't find the answer I'm looking for, right? C, the X-ray evidence. Again, that wasn't what the biological interest was it? It was that there's not one, but two chains. And finally, D, DNA consisting of two chains. So it doesn't get much more direct than that, right, guys? If I were to go back here, the only question is, we're talking about DNA, right? Is this talking about DNA? I look back and I see, oh yeah, this passage is about DNA. Now, of course, in the real test, you would have read the passage itself, right? So, having read the passage, you would have known this is clearly about DNA. But when we're practicing just doing the answer choice, sometimes it's a little unclear. So don't worry right now. It's okay to go back and find it at this point. But in the real test, just to remind you, you would have read it, so you would have had that context already. Okay. So the answer must here be D, of course. Let's try one more, guys. That was pretty straightforward. We're going to pick one more that's a little bit more tricky, okay? The authors use the word backbone in lines 3 and 39 to indicate that. So here's line 3, here's line 39. I'm looking for what both lines say about the DNA, the backbone, I should say, the backbone. So if it only says it in one sentence, that's not my answer, right? It's got to be in both sentences. So let's read the first one. The molecule is a very long chain, the backbone of which consists of a regular alternation of sugar and phosphate groups. Now, I read that fast on purpose because if you're like me, usually you just read it, blah, 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 and you'll read it, right? And you're like, oh gosh, backbone, molecules. Not everything registers. And that's a problem. You're going to have to go back and read it again and again. Instead, what I want you to do is almost think in bullet points, right? So take those ideas in that sentence and kind of just list out what those points are. Let's try it for this first one. The molecule is a very long chain. There's my first point. when I'm practicing, I actually write this down on a scrap piece of paper. The molecule is a long chain. That's the first piece of information. Then it says, the backbone of which consists of a regular alternation of sugar and phosphate groups. So the second detail is that the long chain has a backbone which has a regular alternation of sugar and phosphate. I mean, it's okay if you don't know exactly what that means. I'm not like a chemistry guy, so I don't really know either. But backbone has regular chain of sugar and phosphate. Just write it down for now, okay? Let's look at the second one. The phosphate sugar backbone of our model is completely regular. So that's the first thing I'm going to write down again. Phosphate sugar backbone is regular. Already I see the same thing, right? It was about that backbone being regular and that the backbone has sugar and phosphate. That seems like the answer to me, but let's double check. Keep reading. But any sequence of the pairs of bases can fit into the structure. I mean, it's definitely an important piece of information. I'll write it down, but I'll see that it's not contained in that first sentence. That's not going to be relevant to the answer choice. But you write it down anyway, just in case. You never know. Let's look at the answer choices. Remember, what I wrote down that was similar was that the phosphate sugar backbone of this molecule has a regular pattern. Let's check. A says, only very long chains of DNA can be taken from an organism with a spinal column. You know, a lot of people will get confused by this and say, oh, there's chains, there's DNA. Like, spinal column, isn't that the backbone? People think to themselves. But just like I said you have to read the passage sentence very carefully, you need to read the answer choice very carefully too. What does that even mean? Because I see so many kids, maybe more than half my students, might pick an answer like that just because there are similar words in the answer choice. But if I think and I break down that sentence, it says, the long chains can be taken from organisms with backbones. I didn't mention anything about taking chains of DNA from the backbone, right? So that can't be the answer. So I'm going to cross that one off. Let's look at B. The main structure of a chain in a DNA molecule is composed of repeating units. That sounds pretty good, right? It's the main structure, and it said that was the backbone. The backbone, as an expression, means it's the main part, doesn't it? The chain of DNA was mentioned. Is composed of repeating or regular units. So B, I'm pretty sure is my answer. But guys, I'm practicing right now. I don't want to just check it and go, yes, I'm done. Let me just double check C and D to make sure that those aren't possibly correct. C, a chain in a DNA molecule consists entirely of phosphate groups or of sugars. Let me look back. I mean, it just says that the DNA has phosphate groups or sugars almost entirely. I remember it saying the backbone had phosphate and sugars, so it sounds like it could be a possible answer. I'm not sure, so I'm going to look back at the notes, at my notes or the passage. And I never say anywhere that it is entirely made up of the sugar and phosphates, right? It means that's the only thing, almost entirely made there. Now, you may assume that, but it doesn't say it. It doesn't say it, so it's not a direct detail. So boom, we know that's not the answer choice. It's not a direct detail. D says nitrogenous bases form the main structural unit of DNA. I don't know what nitrogenous bases are, but I mean, I can go back and check if I need to. But I mean, I know that it said actually phosphates and sugars, right? So again, that's probably like a very simple distractor, right? So that's not going to be the answer. That's one that they just had to make up 4 answer choices. They threw it in there, okay? So we're pretty confident at this point. The answer must be B. So that was pretty simple, right? It was pretty easy to do. And you know, this is the easiest type of question for sure, because all you need to do is find the answer choice that, of course, answers the question, but also that you can source directly from the passage, okay? So if we were to review, what do I want you to remember from this lesson? First of all, and that's something I didn't mention earlier, but always read the entire sentence from which a reference comes. If you only read the phrase that it indicated, or just a few parts, like what if the end of the sentence said not, right? Or what if it said like, this is not a true fact, or it's a criticism? So you always need to read the entire sentence. That's a very important detail, guys. Secondly, always select the answer that exactly describes the sentence. Okay? Not one that you can infer, not one that could be true, but says exactly what the passage does. Now, if you do that, you're going to get at least half the questions on this test right. Do this well, right? When you go through the practice, make sure you're doing this with a lot of attention to detail. And the other stuff, this is going to take you 50% of the way. The rest of the 50% is going to come from the rest of the course.